You're listening to the Escape into Gaming podcast with your host, Nathan, aka Kilnieth. Join us as we explore escapism into the various weird and wonderful worlds of video games. Whether it's something immersive and first person, or something deep and strategic, we will be escaping boredom, stress, pain, and pressure with dragons, racing, space, and sneaking. And without further ado, let's get started.
Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Escape into Gaming podcast, where we explore and deep dive into escapism within video games. In today's episode, we are going to be discussing games that we're currently playing, which for this week has been a bunch of System Shock 2 Remastered. And of course, we are going to go into our focus game with the surprising adventure that is Outward. But before any of that, I just wanted to say a huge thank you so much to everyone who has listened to the episode so far. Every like and every comment has been hugely motivational towards making new episodes and such, and I would love to hear more stories from your gaming experience. So I'd like to start this episode off with a question. What game have you found yourself unable to pull away from recently? This week, I've been playing the System Shock 2 Anniversary Remaster, which is really interesting actually. It's because of last week's episode where I was talking about Deus Ex and how System Shock kind of inspired the immersive sim genre of game that I decided to go back and revisit them. Plus I managed to get the Anniversary Remaster on a deal, which is always nice. But the original, very first System Shock was kind of the birth of the immersive sim genre, and it's actually been quite weird because one thing I've always considered kind of key to immersive sims is the fact that you can approach all the various scenarios and how to get from point A to point B in whatever way that you want to. And I would say that System Shock 1 and 2 don't actually encompass that. You don't particularly have a choice of approach. There's not often multiple routes to get to places. You can obviously choose your weapons, and in System Shock 2 you've got quite decent RPG stats, which I do think influence Deus Ex quite a lot. But there is a lot less opportunity for multiple routes. What they do present though is a really rich and in-depth game world. There's tons and tons of little details that have been thought out. There's clutter all over the place, all kinds of random objects that are completely useless, like plant pots, picture frames, things like that. You've got audio logs, which I think is one of the key things they did introduce from a storytelling perspective. Like, instead of everything being told through cutscenes and, reading text and stuff like that, you've got these audio logs from the people who were attempting to survive what happened to Citadel Station in System Shock 1 and the Von Braun and Rickenbacker in System Shock 2. So you hear these stories of how people have been trying to survive and escape from what's going on. They do have one thing which is what I would class as an open world. Like, to me, an open world is somewhere where you can go backwards and forwards completely at a whim. If you decide that you want to go to an earlier part of the game, you can literally walk back there. You can take an elevator and then end up back there. Maybe you've left some supplies in an earlier level, so you can go back and pick up that shotgun that you couldn't equip, for example. Maybe you know where a healing station or a recharge station is on the first level, and you might not have unlocked them on the next level. So being able to go back and forth like that, in my mind, that is the definition of an open world. It doesn't have to be one huge map that you are going through. It's just if you can go back and forth. But yeah, System Shock is a sci-fi, cyberpunky kind of story that introduces the rogue AI Shodan, who famously inspired GLaDOS in Portal, and probably quite a lot of other AI, voice acted by, I think, if memory serves, it was the person who did the music, or one of the directors. They were in a band, and it was that person's wife who ended up voicing Shodan. And Shodan herself was probably inspired by, the classics like HAL 9000 or something like that. But yeah, I've never ever completed a shock game because I do find that they eventually get quite stressful. If you played BioShock, for example, you'll know that the enemies tend to respawn. And System Shock has that as well. System Shock 1 and 2, the enemies will respawn randomly, so you're constantly draining your ammo, draining your health resources. So, yeah, I do find them getting quite stressful, but I'm enjoying it. The remaster is pretty good. It adds control support, which is nice and handy. It runs really nicely, and I've heard that in System Shock 2 specifically, the multiplayer that used to be buggy as heck is actually fixed and works in the new release. So yeah, definitely something to consider checking out if you like those kind of games. So the focus game for this week's episode is a game called Outward. And it's a very surprising game for me because I remember randomly seeing it in a YouTube video, having never heard of it before, never seen anything to do with it before. And my first thoughts were, oh, this kind of seems similar to Dark Souls. You've got a health meter and a stamina meter on the screen. You've got the ability to like roll dodge out of the way and stuff. And the thing that I noticed that kind of separated it from that is that it had survival mechanics as well. When I watched this YouTube video, this guy's wandering around on a pier, picking up some seaweed and a torch and stuff like that, and then he started to take a drink from the ocean, which was not the best idea because he got sick from it. But yeah, little did I know that it turned out to be the most survivally adventure and the most adventurous survival game that I've ever played so far. The game was released in 2019 by a small studio called 9 Dot Studio, and it reminds me a heck of a lot of Morrowind, which, as you'll know from the past, is a game that I absolutely adore. You start off as an absolute nobody. You're not special, you're not destined to do anything, and you're also not immune to failure. Graphically, the game looks, in my opinion, very pretty in some areas. You can tell it was made by a bit of a smaller studio. Some of the character models are a little bit rough, and the textures are perfectly fine. But it's got that kind of, when you look at mountains and stuff, and you can see the shapes that make up all of the rocks and stuff like that. It's got a bit of that going on, but it does run really, really well. Can't say the same for the Switch version. I was very tempted to get the Switch version, but that looks probably about as bad as a modern Pokemon game. If you know, you know. I must say, though, the music presents a fantastic sense of adventure. You've got, like, in the first area, you've got this initial droning sound with a bit of fear and uncertainty because you're stepping out into an adventure that you've kind of been thrust into. And eventually it moves into some whimsy and fantasy where you've got drums and trumpets kind of driving you to press on in your adventure. And just the atmosphere alone, presented by the music, really kind of heightens the feel of adventure in this game. So, in the beginning of the game, you actually start after a shipwreck with literally nothing. You can take some clothes and a torch from nearby, and if you wander around a bit, there's various other scraps and stuff like the seaweed. I don't think you can get a water skin at the start, but anyway. You can find a camp nearby if you follow the fire and the light. And in there you will find a friend that your character knows from the town that you live in, and he'll advise you to go to sleep. Everything's gone tits up, the ship's wrecked and everything, so go to sleep, and then you'll head back to town in the morning. You can actually explore around this area though, and you can get your very first taste of combat, provided you haven't done the tutorial, because there's some nearby hyenas, and they are awful, especially when you've got no gear whatsoever. I think you can pick up a machete, which is like a basic one-handed type sword in the game. And fighting these off is kind of your first challenge. Even with the amount of times I've played this game, I can still end up getting beaten by these hyenas, which is fun. But yeah, you can find a few extra items just to either sell later on or set yourself up a bit better. And the loot is actually randomised. I don't know if it's randomised in terms of like loot tables per area or something, but I know one time I looted these pots next to the ocean and ended up getting what was actually a really good set of clothing, because it increased the amount of pocket slots that I could carry, so you can actually have stuff in your pockets easily accessible and that. But yeah, when you arrive back in town, you're immediately set upon by all the townsfolk, because it turns out the reason you were going on that voyage in the ship is to try and gain some riches and fortune to pay off what's called a blood debt that your family's incurred. So I don't think I think it is explained that your character isn't necessarily the one who created the blood debt, but they pass on from generation to generation. So even if it was something one of your ancestors did, doesn't matter, you're the one who's got to pay for it. So yeah, not only do you start off with absolutely nothing, but you are heavily in debt, and all of the townsfolk are very keen to take your home from you, which is the lighthouse in the town, because they want to resell it on to repay your debt. So the leader of the settlement, I think she's called Risa Aberdeen, she gives you 5 days of which you've got to pay off this debt, otherwise you will lose your home, and you actually will lose your home. If you don't manage to get enough silver together, you will lose it forever for the rest of the game, and if you want another home, you'll have to buy one later on in the game and spend time sleeping at inns rather than the comfort of your own home for free. So that's a bit of a scary thought. And there's a few ways you can go about getting the silver together to pay off your debt. There's also a way to earn what's called a writ of tribal favour, which immediately clears your debt because you've essentially saved somebody's life. But I'm not going to spoil that just yet. You know, if anybody does want to play the game, you will hopefully either find that or find another method to pay it off. But yeah, after you do manage to pay off your debt, you're free, and you're probably feeling quite bitter about the situation that you've found yourself in, you know, with this blood price over your head. So the Risa will direct you to speak to Yizan, the friend who you met on the shipwrecked beach from earlier, and another friend called Oliel. And you will learn that both of them are also unhappy with like the way that this tribe handles matters with blood prices and stuff like that. So they're both actually planning to leave the tribe, and both will say, you know, why don't you come out and find me? When you get out into the big wide world, you can either go to the desert to meet up with Yizan, who is joining the Kingdom of Levant, I believe it's called, the Free Kingdom of Levant. Or Oliel is going to join this religious order. So they both invite you to come with them. Risa will say that you can stay with the Blue Chamber Collective, the kind of name of the tribe that you live under. And you've got a choice as to which faction you want to join for the rest of the game's plot. There is actually a fourth one as well if you've got the DLC, which if you buy the remastered version that's currently on like every platform, you will have a fourth option to start off with, though that does take some heavy investment to get there and is a completely separate plot, but it was DLC after all. But yeah, if you want to fully experience the game, you're probably going to take, you know, at least 4 playthroughs to go through each of the main plot lines and storylines. And then the final DLC that was added is kind of an extension to them. So once you've completed one of these plot lines, you can go and do the extra new region that they've added, where you actually end up building a town, which is quite interesting. But yeah, before you end up leaving the starter town that you're in, you're probably going to start chatting to some more of the townsfolk, at which point you can pick up a few extra side quests. One will want you to take a ledger from the local shop and deliver it to the next shop. And that's kind of like a chained quest where you go from shop to shop to shop. And these are big journeys, mind you. You've got to go to an entirely new region to be able to deliver it. And also, you will probably learn a little bit about the game's, in air quotes, leveling system, because this is an RPG, but it's not like any other traditional RPG out there. You don't learn EXP, you don't actually level your character up, there is no concept of character levels. You will always remain the exact same level, and your strength and power and what you can withstand is mainly dictated by the equipment that you have. But you can pay trainers to teach you special moves, some new abilities, or even to boost your stats. So if you do want to have more health or more stamina and that, you can pay somebody to train you to improve that particular skill. But you do have to be careful with these, because you've got a limited amount of what the game calls breakthrough points, and once you commit to those, you can like buy any of the skills you want before this breakthrough point. But as soon as you commit to that breakthrough point, that's it. That's spent. I think you start off with 3, and there is a way to get a 4th one. But yeah, you do want to kind of go out, get a feel for the various mechanics, whether that's, whether you want to be a melee fighter, a ranged fighter, be sneaky about stuff, use traps or use magic. You want to get a feel for it first before you actually fully commit to any of the progression paths, because you will lock yourself out of other ones. You can't get every single skill in existence. You can come up with some really good variety in the character builds though, especially when it comes to magic. There's multiple different magic paths. The kind of standard magic path is a more ritualistic way of doing magic, but I'll come on to a bit more of that later. But yeah, once you start adventuring, you'll probably see the Morrowind parallels if you have played that game, because the world it's a fantasy world, but it's also a post-apocalyptic fantasy world, and not the typical kind of nuclear explosion post-apocalyptia. It's a post-apocalyptia where a big religious battle went on against essentially demons, but they're not quite demons. It's kind of hard to explain. But the world, it has all kinds of weird and wonderful creatures, like Wendigos. You've got these birds called jewel birds that run around. They look like cute, fluffy ostrich kind of things. You've got flaming horse demons and glowing, angelic-looking machines. So it's not your typical fantasy fare at all. Quite a lot of combat is also against human enemies, so you do have all the bandits and rival tribes and stuff like that as well. So you do get some, sword on sword play or person with big axe kind of stuff. But yeah, combat is definitely very much inspired by Souls-like games. You've got stamina management playing a huge part in your movement, and every single weapon that you've got have completely different movesets as well. So you've got your one-handed swords, your two-handed swords, you've got spears. I love the game for having spears. Not enough games have spears, I think. You've got battle axes, you've got clubs, all kinds of stuff like that, and each of them have a different moveset. And you've got a primary attack and a secondary attack, so depending on how many primary attacks you do, that will then dictate what your secondary attack does. So like with the normal sword, I think if you do a primary attack followed by a secondary, you'll do this kind of sideward slash, and the combat does feel quite janky, I will say. It's not as smooth. This is an indie game after all. I would say it's an indie game. But the combat is not as smooth and fluid as like Dark Souls, especially more modern Dark Souls games. But it is very satisfying when you learn the movesets for all of these weapons, and you learn like what attacks you can do depending on the enemy's distance and stuff like that. And you've also got ranged weapons as well. You've got bows, you've even got pistols, like flintlock style pistols as well. Interestingly, your character actually physically carries a backpack in this game as well. It's not like Skyrim or something where you've just got this void that all of your equipment disappears into. And there's a variety of different backpacks in the game, and those will dictate your carrying capacity, but it also limits your movement in combat. So if you try to roll with a backpack on, you'll do what the people in the Dark Souls community like to call a fat roll. You're very, very slow and sluggish as you roll around with this huge backpack on your back. So, like a kid in the schoolyard, you're going to have to shrug your backpack off if you want to fight effectively. Which means you have to make sure that important items that you may want during combat are actually in your character's pockets. So you've got two inventories. You've got your pockets dictated by the clothing that you wear, and then you've got your backpack for carrying everything else. So if you've got healing potions, bandages, stuff like that, you're probably going to want to carry them in your pockets so that you've got access to them when you've shrugged your backpack off. And yeah, like I alluded to earlier, magic is one of the most interesting implementations of magic that I've ever seen in a game, because it takes on a more ritualistic approach where you're probably going to have to prepare items in advance for most forms of magic. If you learn magic, you'll have like this little spark spell that does bugger all. Like, do not use the spark spell against enemies. You can use it to light campfires, but it's going to do nothing to an enemy. So what you need to do is make these firestones, and then you throw one of them up in the air and it casts this circle around you, this flaming circle. And at that point, if you're stood in the circle and you cast your spark ability, you'll actually shoot a fireball instead. So you're actually kind of performing rituals for each spell you want to do, and there's some really cool combinations as well. There's a separate skill tree where you learn wind magic, and I don't think that requires any stones, but you can still combine that with other spells as well. So you might want to use that firestone and then cast some wind magic into it to send like a tornado of fire out at enemies. And one of them is you hold a book in one of your hands, like this lexicon of magic, and depending on how many skill points you've invested into that particular skill tree, which is runic magic, will dictate what runes you can actually cast. So once you've got this book in your hand, you'll have like four symbols that you can cast, and depending on the order you do them and the length you do them, they will do different things as well. So a certain sequence of these runes will summon a spectral sword into your hand, whereas another one might perform a basic attack. But yeah, I don't think any form of magic, as far as I'm aware, provides any healing. So it's not that kind of magic. It is very much like a physical form of magic where you're pushing and pulling stuff, or conjuring electricity or lightning or ice and stuff like that as well. And funnily enough, you won't actually start with the ability to do magic, because again, you're starting as an absolute nobody. You'll have to venture into a place called Spiral Mountain to unlock the ability to even have mana points, and that comes with a caveat as well, because you have to sacrifice some of your health to feed it into mana. There's kind of like a trade-off. I can't remember the exact recipe for it, but it's something like every 5 health points you invest into magic, you will get 10 magic points in return. So you are lowering your overall, amount of beatings you can take to have the ability to cast spells, which come in incredibly useful, don't get me wrong. But yeah, you kind of want to decide that you want to be a magic character or a melee character or a range character, ideally. But yeah, at this point, I should probably highlight the map in the game as well, because I know some people will hate this. I absolutely adore it. There is no map marker showing where you are. When you set out into the world and look at your map, you'll have to learn the lay of the land and navigate via various landmarks, which are highlighted on the map. It will tell you where Ciezo, the starting town, is. It will tell you where nearby bandit camps are, or where Spiral Mountain is, which is the huge mountain in the starting area, so you kind of can't miss it. And using that information, that's how you kind of realise where you are on the map. You're kind of triangulating your position. And I just absolutely love that, because first of all, you're going to be encouraged to thoroughly explore every map in the game to learn its layout and learn the paths from A to B and stuff like that. But also, like, when it comes to the sense of adventure, like, what better way of feeling like you're actually on an adventure than having to figure out where the heck you are to start off with? It really does capture the essence of adventure, which I think is this game's absolute strong point. If there's one thing I associate with this game, it's just that pure sense of adventure. And when it comes to survival, your character will need to sleep, eat, and drink to keep yourself healthy. You are not just some immortal person who never needs to eat. And that comes with its own challenges as well. You can't just go around, dip your head in a river and hope for the best, because you're probably going to get parasites or an illness or something. And of course, you can't eat raw food, because you're probably going to catch something from that as well. So you'll have to decide, do you want to bring a cooking pot with you? Because when you're out and about, you can place out a full camp. You can chop down some trees. Well, trees actually have infinite wood, which I think is a good convenience factor rather than, wood being limited or something. But yeah, you can get some wood from some trees, put together a campfire. Then you've got to figure out how to light it. Like, if you've got the magic spark ability, you can snap your fingers and conjure up some fire. Otherwise, you're going to need some flint and steel. Otherwise, you're a bit stuck for lighting a fire. You can place out bedrolls and tents. Some areas that you decide to sleep in are safer than others. Can't remember if the game does actually tell you this or not, but there are spots with like butterflies flying around, and those tend to be safe spots to set up camp. But you can camp anywhere you want, and you can be interrupted while you're sleeping. But yeah, if you decide to bring a cooking pot with you, you'll be able to make full-on meals. Like, provided you've got the ingredients, you can cook a huge variety of meals. Meat stuff tends to slowly restore your health. I think fish tends to restore your magic, your mana. And everything else will either provide various buffs or resistances to your character as well. So there's a full cooking system and a full alchemy system as well. And that's another thing. Like, if you're carrying around a backpack filled with a bedroll, a tent, a cooking pot, an alchemy machine, you're gonna not have a lot of carrying capacity for everything else. So it's a case of, do you plan short excursions out where you go out into the world, do something, head back to town, resupply, sell off any loot that you want to sell off, or do you go fully kitted out, go out there so that you can live outside for absolute days or something? It's literally like, if you think of the Lord of the Rings or the Hobbit, where they're going out on these adventures, they're going on these huge treks across Middle-earth. They've got all these backpacks on with cooking equipment and all that kind of stuff. And this game is about the only game I've ever experienced that really captures that essence, that element of adventure, but also travel, fantasy travel. How do you get from A to B and still be able to feed yourself and sleep when it gets dark or when you're feeling tired and stuff? On top of the survival system, I should probably mention that as you wander around, especially if you're sprinting around, you will find that your stats get what's called burned. So as you run around, your maximum stamina will slowly start to decrease, and you need to sleep to keep that up. And as you get into combat as well, your maximum health will gradually decrease, because you need to take time to actually heal up and recover from your wounds before you can get to maximum health again. And just to add on top of that as well, you also need to manage your temperature, because the very first area you're in will actually shift from a kind of spring kind of season where all the plants are out and the trees are all green and stuff like that, over to a winter season periodically. So the whole area will be completely covered with snow, and that brings with it an obvious shift in temperature. So you have to make that decision of, do I go out in my best possible armour so that I can take the most hits, or do I have to wear something warmer because maybe you're not carrying a torch with you, or maybe you don't have any cups of tea that'll warm you up or something. So instead of freezing to death, you have less armour, which puts you at more risk of enemies, but at the same time you can at least survive out there in the cold. And later on in the game you can visit a desert as well, where the Kingdom of Levant is, and that is filled with, absolute sweltering heat and very sparse water. So that makes survival as much a challenge for the player as you've got the challenge of the elements and dealing with survival, as well as dealing with the actual enemies in the game as well. One of the single most interesting things I find about Outward is the fact that the entire game can be completed in multiplayer, whether that's playing it split screen with a friend next to you and a couple of controllers, or playing it online. And having another player with you does make the game a lot easier, but at the same time it does mean that you have to manage more resources in terms of your food and supply and healing and all that. And of course you also have to deal with the who gets that brand new fancy enchanted axe that you've just found. But the ability to actually go on this huge adventure with another person is absolutely fantastic. Like, there's so many RPGs where I often wish you could just play them in co-op. Like, why not? Why can you not just have a second player with you? And with this game, whether you're both huge Souls-like veterans and you go for no-hit runs and you're absolutely perfect at it, or maybe one of you is a little more cautious and need a little bit of protecting, but they pretty good at carrying supplies for you. There's a really great experience to be had in multiplayer here. It is a full adventure for the both of you. It is only 2-player in the base game, so there can only be 2 of you, but I have heard that there are some mods out there that allow, I believe, up to 32 players, which would be absolutely insane. Like, don't do that. That's not how to play the game. But yeah, as you progress through the game and you engage with whichever faction's plotline you've chosen, you're going to find that there's various quests that can actually be failed. Some of them rely on you doing something within a certain time frame. Others might be failed if you fight and fail against a particular boss. So the story can actually become this dynamic thing that you learn to, either optimize on repeat playthroughs, or if you're only experiencing it for the first time, it's going to be unique to how you've gone about doing the quest and the decisions you've made, and whether you've decided to prioritize the main plotline or just mess around roaming dungeons. To hinder your success in the quests and survival in general, the game also has this really interesting failure state system where instead of like it popping up saying game over, your character's dead, or respawning you or something like that, or just loading a save, you instead find that you will face the repercussions for your actions. And believe me, there is not an easy way to game this system. The game will autosave when you fail. And this is presented through a variety of failure states. So in some, you might be rescued by a kind passerby who will nurse you back to some semblance of being alive and give you some food and supplies and say, better luck next time. But in another, you might actually find that you've been stripped of all of your gear and placed into a makeshift prison by some bandits who want you to mine out ore for them, or try and find some way of escaping from that. And these failure states are all region dependent, so depending on which area you're in or which dungeon you're in. None of them lead to a true bad end, but there's so many of them in the game, and the hazard is that time will actually pass in the background whilst you've been unconscious or imprisoned, and escape can actually be quite perilous. I remember one time I was in the desert and I got defeated and woke up in a random dungeon that I'd never been to before, didn't know what enemies were in there, didn't know the layout of the place or anything. I had absolutely nothing with me other than, I think, a basic outfit, a torch, and I managed to find a random sword lying around, and eventually I did manage to recover my gear, but the place was crawling with these bandits that I had to either sneak past or fight in order to escape. And generally, if you fail again, you'll probably find that the next failure state kicks you outside, and it's one of the nicer ones. But it's so cool because that's another aspect of the adventure in this game. Every single thing you do will affect that adventure and what you as a player actually experience. So, when was the last time that you went on an adventure? And if you haven't, I would say consider giving Outward a try. You can get it on most modern platforms. It's quite often on sale. When I first bought it for the Xbox One, I think it was like £3 or something on the Xbox store. So it does go on sale fairly often. And most excitingly of all, the sequel, Outward 2, should be releasing in the near future. Thank you so much for listening to episode 3. I do truly hope that you've enjoyed it and it's perhaps inspired you to head onward and outward. Badum-tish. If you've got any feedback or comments, or if you want to share some of the adventures that you've had recently, please feel free to leave them on the YouTube version of this episode or in our Discord server, where we chat about all kinds of games, whether it's ones that are in the episodes or not. And we have to play multiplayer games together as well. I am in the process of finishing up the Patreon page or system, whatever you call it. So you can actually leave comments on Patreon as well per episode, and maybe if I can find something worth typing about, I'll post some posts up there as well. But I am planning to have it so that the supporters of the podcast will be able to access new episodes a week in advance. So you get kind of a week's early access to each episode. I think that's kind of like the standard thing to do. But yes, regardless of any of that, thank you once again for listening to this episode. I do hope that you have yourself a fantastic weekend filled with adventure, and I hope that you will join us next week for episode 4, Maturing Through Games.